everybody. I'm Brendan Davis.
And I'm Yingying Li.
And we are your co-hosts and creators of
How China Works. We wanted to leave you something special to wrap up season 1, so we decided to make this video.
Yeah, we're going to do a very high-level summary of the first 8 weeks of the show here, and we're going to touch on specific things from various episodes each week as we go. Now, just a couple of quick technical notes, since I'm kind of the technical guy for us here. First of all, enjoy our high-tech setup with the webcam, and our lovely trusty mic is right here out of frame. Also, our notes, they're right here, so we're going to glance down because we can edit, but we don't want to if we don't have to. We want to keep it rolling. Okay.
So let's start at the beginning. Let's look at week 1.
I think that's a great idea. We have covered so many topics in this. We've been trying to do this crash course in China. And the very first topic, what did we cover here week 1? What's that one all about?
Chinese business dinner.
Exactly. And that first episode, we talked about the Chinese business drinking culture. That was a lot of fun.
Drinking has a very special place in Chinese culture, and it helps Chinese to let hair down and, like you might say, and to reveal the Chinese people's inner side with safety and comfort.
Absolutely. I like comfort. Now, drinking has been a key part of the art and creative process here, like poetry and music, for over 5,000 years, right?
Can you imagine that?
I can imagine that. So, in one sense, drinking really helps to people to appreciate the art, and part of the idea is that you're walking in the same footsteps of the creators. In other words, you're drunk.
Yeah, I was drunk actually in the episode, right?
A little bit. Were you drunk? I like that.
When I was 10.
That's right. We talk about that. It's a great story. So the next episode is Where Do I Sit and How Do I Toast? Now, this may seem like a small thing, but where you sit at a Chinese business dinner, that's actually
super important.
Big deal. Super important. It's almost as important as knowing who and how and when to toast, okay? So we really get into that. And food is also very important.
Of course. And food is the first necessity in Chinese people's life. As we say here, it's 民以食为天. This term defines a lot of culture in China. Eating together builds 关系, obviously, and which is a critical part of Chinese people's life here.
Absolutely. Also, filling someone's glass is a big show of respect. So don't be surprised when someone does that for you. Like, we have our tea right here. Right. Now, Ingy already has a full glass. So I'll demonstrate. Ingy, would you like to demonstrate? Ingy will pour me a little tea.
Okay, ganbei.
Oh, okay, you're not pouring me tea. You're not listening to what I'm saying. That's okay.
All right.
That's okay.
We're losing track right now.
That's okay. No, we need tea, though.
Really?
It's very important. It's a sign of respect. And also what is a sign of respect is getting the name card etiquette right. We covered that on episode 3. That's all about name card etiquette, the rise of WeChat, and we talked about bridging the gaps between what is called the acquaintance versus a stranger society. And WeChat helps you to do that.
加个微信吧.
Yes. 对.
So here we want to also mention a very important concept. It's called Li. It refers to the moral guidelines regarding the right behavior in all kinds of situations. Among other things, relates to how to deal with this issue of hierarchy. I finally can pronounce this correctly.
I was very excited. That was a big breakthrough because I can barely speak any Chinese, and the fact that Miss Awesome here is so fluent, it's pretty impressive. Speaking of awesome, is using WeChat has become a new way to build guanxi, right? Yeah. And this concept of Li, we really try to help you understand how important that is in Chinese society in that episode. Episode 4 is all about eating and good table manners, and on this one, a lot of treats. First of all, Yingying shows off some drumming skills, little drummer girl, right? We talk about what not to do with your chopsticks.
Exactly.
Drumming is a hint of that. I talk about what summoning a demon has in common with good table manners, and that's a bit of a stretch. And we also learn the right way to fill these liquor teacups that you can get a lot of practice draining.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And we share some other professional tips on what about...
Yeah, good table manners.
Yeah, of course, table manners
and what do we
in
call
general.
These? The chopsticks?
You teach me. What is that?
Kuaitsa.
That's a big thing here. How to be a master of kuaits means a lot to you when you're dealing with Chinese.
I haven't missed a lot of meals. I figured it out by now, in case you can't tell.
You should try more.
To learn more. Next episode up is KTV, and that was a pretty fun one.
One of my favorites, because you know that I'm my queen always in KTV. Also, we should have been, to try more a lot of times.
Yes,
In
very
this
nice.
episode, we talk about KTV, which is what China calls karaoke, and its role in cementing social bonds. After a successful business dinner, right? Generally, after dinner, we go to KTV and we want to hang out with friends. It's a great way to show how to build guanxi, right?
And we discussed its origins. We talked about how it spread to China and the different ways that people enjoy it today.
Of course.
Yes. Week 2. We're already at week 2. It's going to move right along.
Yeah.
So, decoding Chinese communications and checking my notes. High context communications. This was a big one. This was
Very
something.
important.
When you told me about this, as we did our research, because we do a lot of research on that. Unlike this is actually, as you see, it's pretty unedited so far. It's not edited at all. The real shows, we researched them like crazy. We put a lot of effort into making the notes. And the high context concept, I got it when you explained it. All of a sudden, half the things that never made sense.
It started to make sense to you because you know that China favors high context culture, 高语境, whereas the US and most European countries are low context. You know why, right?
Exactly. The Chinese culture relies a lot on these implicit communication and nonverbal cues, right?
Exactly.
So if you don't understand the background information, you're going to miss actually the message. And this actually relates, we talked in the episode a bit about how this relates in this, to the agricultural history of the country.
And agricultural economy cannot survive for over 3,000 years under the sun if the people at that time aren't working together harmoniously, in a high context environment. In that environment, individualistic viewpoints make it very hard to keep people together and to manage things together, getting things done, which is where the concept of 含蓄, right? I told you.
Right.
From.
And Hanshu, as I understand, it's like Chinese, it's not just like writing or language, it's like Chinese culture, really,
well, that's
right?
something so strong in a Chinese people's life. 含蓄 is almost like the cultural code for us to, to behave. We don't want to be too direct every single time.
Right. And we talk about that. Speaking about the next episode is one that we ended up, as we've done now, 39. This is number 40 of these episodes, including the intro is 41. But we keep coming back to this next episode as one, the one we just talked about, and this one, number 7, modesty, humility, and hierarchy.
How do you pay someone a sincere compliment in China and have it be well received?
Right.
And how and why does this differ from the way that you were grown in the West?
In the West, it's all about the modesty, humility, and hierarchy. And so basically in this one, we look at the cultural communication differences between the East and West related to how you give compliments. Oh, and this one is the big one. This is the one.
I finally learned this word, hierarchy.
That's very good.
So I practiced more than over 20 times.
At least. But you got it. See, she just nailed that.
And I practiced it perfect.
Absolutely. So negotiation is the next one. Also very important. This was a lot of fun because YINGYING helped to put some meat on the bone of concepts that I kind of got and I've dealt with doing business here. But this one talks really about 2 dominant styles of negotiating in China. There is this kind of Tai Chi style that's more from Confucius. And then there's this Art of War Sun Tzu kind of style, which is really gangsta. And we talk about how to the merging of these styles, and some negotiations is more one than the other. But we're always trying to maintain harmony, face, and guanxi.
And we have to remember that negotiating styles and strategies in China refer a lot to the ancient philosophies and leaders of the past. So probably you know that the study of Tai Chi, right? People practice and really embody it every day. And the classic book, The Art of War by Sun Tzu, manifest a lot of negotiation strategies, right?
Absolutely, and there's so many Sun Tzu quotes, and you've heard this, and if you listen to any kind of motivational rah-rah kind of people, we're energetic. We're not so much motivational. We're informational. But there's some great quotes. A few of the ones, a leader leads by example, not by force, which is ironic because he also talks a lot about force.
Well, speaking of that, I want to mention what leadership really means is leadership means someone want to follow. So resonating with what you just mentioned.
Very nice. And that actually ties into the other one that I have highlighted to mention is one of the most famous ones, know thyself, know thy enemy. Right? That's a pretty good one to know.
知己知彼，百战不殆.
Ooh, very nice. Well, that's very nice of you. So, thank you. The next episode, yes, no, please, and thank you. We talk about courtesy. You see what I did there. Nice.
All right, courtesy is universal, but how you express your courtesy, it's most definitely not.
Absolutely. On this episode, we start to tie together how high context culture, modesty, hierarchy, harmony, and more things work together. Why can Chinese people not just say yes or no to direct questions very, very typically?
Well, obviously, you have to listen to our episode, and there's so much secret revealed.
It is.
But these days, the younger generation, like my generation, have developed a more blunt way of communication, which means more direct. And we understand among our peers, there is an idea that good friends are so close.
Right.
You know that, right? I mention about my good friends all the time. They're like part of my body. So why would I say please and thank you to my body all the time?
Thank you, wrist.
So it's like
Thank
a very
you, fist.
close part of me, you know? It's kind of my culture here.
I do. And gratitude in China is more often showed by sharing something like a meal or a tea or some kind of a gift rather than saying it. That kind of generosity
Right.
really goes a long way here. And another aspect of the cultural communication, jokes and humor. And we had a lot of fun with this one, too. This is a
course.
tricky one to get right.
Of course. Comedy is a funny subject in China, and today we talk about what works, what doesn't, and of course why.
Yeah.
We also illustrate how
Yeah.
the differences in cultural taste between East and West practically apply here. Plus, we wrap up week 2. Good times.
Absolutely. Every culture, I'm going to read this because I have my notes here. There is a professor and writer, Richard D. Lewis. He's not to be confused with the crazy-haired, the comedian from Curb. It's not that Richard Lewis. I had to do a little extra research to figure this out. He points out that every religion and culture laughs at different things. And his quote here, he mentioned that the Confucian and Buddhist preoccupation with truth, sincerity, kindliness, and politeness automatically eliminates humor techniques such as sarcasm, satire, exaggeration, and parody.
That's
So,
crucially important
He takes
to
away,
remember.
he takes away these things that are like our main. If you're a Westerner and you think you're kind of funny,
But we have our way of being humorous,
you do,
right?
you do. But this explains it just doesn't really work here. It doesn't translate. Week 3, wow. And let me just put in a little plug. This week 3, this is probably our most consistently, that week 1 and week 3 so far are the biggest, like those are the most popular weeks. Like when we look at what are people listening to, they keep going back to that first week of all the super, super basics. And now this. Week 3 is all about what?
Dating and episode 11.
Yes.
Romance between East and West. On this show, we discuss some of the many differences between China and the West when it comes to romance and dating, how to bridge the giant gap between the two, right?
Absolutely. And it's interesting because in the West, of course, not to paint with too broad of a brush, but allow me, the casual hookup culture, it's so prevalent, right? You can get, nookie as easy as you can order like a pizza in the West. And here it is a much different scenario.
I'm shocked I have no official comments.
This is part of the drinking game for how China works. Is certain phrases that we say. It's
Yeah,
like
you
when
taught
he
me a
says
lot,
that,
even though I shouldn't learn.
But you're a good Chinese. You're still a good Chinese girl, from what I understand.
I hope so.
Yes, and speaking of that, you keep a tradition. Next episode is traditional versus modern Chinese dating culture.
Right.
So Chinese millennials, like you, are caught in the middle of this traditional versus modern cultural value mashup. So we talk about marriage markets, Zhenan versus Nuannan. What's that?
Nuannan.
Check out the episode. Thank you. The impacts of policies, materialism, and somehow Confucius manages to worm his way in here as well.
Right. And my favorite term right here is if life doesn't include love, is it even worth living?
I don't know, but you know what? Online dating in China is episode 13. And I just have to read this because I can't do better than this. What do Christian singles, married cheaters, leather daddies, and sugar babies have in common? They all use online dating. And so do Chinese folks, just not in the same ways. What did we talk about in this episode, Ying Yang?
All right, we took a look at the history of online romance both in China and the US and see what parallels we can make between them. Only 10% of the population here use online dating sites. And do you know it's about 38% that in the U.S.?
I'm surprised it's not even higher, but I know this is true. Next up is mixed, being in a blended couple. And mixed nationality couples have special challenges.
Right.
And on this show, we look at how the attitudes have evolved about that and the difference between on and offshore, like those relationships in China versus outside China. And did you know that hot water can even be sort of an aphrodisiac?
Wow, this show looks at some of the more common issues faced by cross-cultural couples. One tip, a guy with a Chinese girl who goes out of his way to get hot water for her shows a strong sense of empathy and understanding of her culture.
Yes, and that is very appreciated. That will get you big brownie points.
Big tip.
Absolutely. Getting serious, next level. We're talking about marriage, y'all. Marriage, how that varies. We talk about marriages in China, where you relate that to the West a little bit, things like that.
Yeah, we also talk about how people navigate their lives after getting married and how it can even lead to the fame and the fortune if you're a random lucky Laowai with a great gift for Chinese culture and languages.
So that rules me out right there. We're also going to talk about things like weddings, how you manage the household bills, things like that. It's very useful. Week 4. Check it out. Week 4, modern working culture. We start off with a look at corporate culture, and specifically, there are a lot of interesting concepts in this one. We look at this concept, 中庸, this modest and balanced style.
Right.
The 狼文化,
狼文化,
the wolf culture.
Right.
Okay, wolf culture. It's pretty deep stuff. And then there's even something called a 后黑学. Say that for me.
后黑学.
Right, and that translates as the thick black principle, and that's always just kind of like right below. Like here's the surface, and it's just right here.
Okay.
And it's some darkness. It's darkness, right?
Well, it's kind of like a house of cards. You watch that.
Yes, that's that in action.
Right, the yin and yang model of reciprocity applies here. The challenge is that millennial post-90s generation comes of age in this corporate world. They sometimes find it hard to give information or communicate with their boss and the older generation, who actually embodies drawing a lot.
Absolutely, and right? Jack Ma's Alibaba culture is to a big extent shaped by this writer Jin Yong. Am I pronouncing the name? He was the most legendary kind of Chinese cultural hero. He's interestingly, there was a thing, Stanley, who was fortunate to work with. He passed away about a week and a half or so, right after Jin Yong.
Oh, this year.
And the Chinese media, they were like side by side because there's a lot of parallels about the heroism thing.
This year, 2018, I mean, God had taken a lot of talent's life.
Yeah.
But we'll honor and always remember that.
Yeah. So if you understand, in the West, if you think of the characters of heroism Stan Lee created, Jin Yong, he's very similar to the Chinese psyche. He's had a huge impact.
It's a big part for understanding Chinese culture, traditional Chinese culture, and the values and the brotherhood and those hero culture here, and just so much things to manifest.
Okay, the next episode up is about startups and 996 culture, and this is really interesting. I learned a lot from YINGYING and from the research on this one especially. Startup culture in China is a result of 4 distinct waves of innovation and entrepreneurship, and the premier of the country, Premier Li Keqiang, am I saying Mr. Li's name? Mr. La, is it La or Li? Mr. Li. Mr. Li, of course, it's like, he had a very special pronouncement about what's coming next with China.
Yeah, he mentioned in 2014, 大众创业万众创新, which is also called 双创 here. It's just created a huge wave of entrepreneurship.
Right.
And we discussed this, we discussed the saying.
Right, this is a great saying that you can relate to.
In 2018, then we should also have the feeling already, like only after the wave has broken, you can see who is naked.
Right.
退潮之后才知道谁在裸泳, which actually this year is a big year to mark, to remember in entrepreneurship here in China.
It is, because we're not trying to spend too much time right now on any one episode. Really important to note this because like all the different startups that have raised money and they're going bust, or there's a lot of issues.
Which might be a good thing for China to really reflect on what really is important, what's the value, I think is a good way.
I think that that's important, and actually, again, these are done in as much as possible. We're trying to be sequential in our design of this, and so reacting to policies is actually our next episode here. This one is about the best way to understand official policies. It's also talking about how useful it is to help you plan your thinking here, right? Now, it's one big tip is not to fully trust the media reports, and that's probably not a newsflash. But even the unbiased summaries, it's most important to try to find somebody, if you can't read Chinese like me, to try to find somebody to help you read through things word by word and really form your own opinion. And that's really the only way to have an idea what's going to happen.
Exactly. And when it comes to partnering up with the government, implementing this environmental scanning strategy, as well as researching the social and economic policies, which is quite important, the entire focus of a successful partnership you want to have here in China would be on problem solving.
Absolutely, and part of that is this this hongbao policy, right? That shows you how foreigner can have the most impact is understanding the Chinese norms. So like the giving and receiving of the hongbaos.
That's the fun way.
Right, that's the fun way, the red envelopes of money. And there's a whole other issue of giving envelopes that's in the episode about corruption that we didn't do. But we're talking about just friendly, gifts among friends and showing courtesy and often exchanging money. There's online, we talked about that with WeChat. And
showcase your cultural intelligence as a Lao Wai to use this hongbao to play on a little bit on WeChat so that you could... Anyway, we can't review too much. You have to listen to our show.
We do. You have to listen to episode number 18. That's 18. Next up is 19. Speaking of a female leader, male versus female leadership, and what's the focus of this episode?
This episode's focus is mostly on female leadership and the accomplishment. Did you know that 70% of the Chinese women billionaires are self-made, 白手起家, and China leads the world in percentage of top executives who are female?
I did know that, but that's because I listened to How China Works, and I learned it from you. 2018 has been notable in terms of global female leadership really being this primary issue that's talked about. China has been making some big waves in this area by openly discussing those female leadership roles in society as that. And that represents this real cultural shift here. And it's about time because powerful women are not uncommon in China. I got some more statistics I have to look. China is home to 49 of the world's 78 self-made female billionaires, which, according to this report that tracks China's wealthiest people. So 49 of 78 self-made female billionaires right here. That's
And
huge.
Speaking of how they can make that happen, here comes to my Yingying's favorite line, which actually I keep that as my life principle, which is why act like there is a box. You know, that's so important in female leadership here. After all, why should you allow yourself to be given a box to fit yourself in, right? So these days, who is suited to give you this box, no matter how small it is or big? Society, media, your parents. Why should you have this box?
Preach it, Ying-Yang.
I should talk to a girl, actually.
Well, I hear you. I know what you're talking to a girl. There's a girl watching right now. Hi, girl. Hi, dude. Hey, boy. What's up, man? Super digital life. We know that because, especially y'all millennials, y'all are online. The super digital life is episode 20. So what even is a super digital life? And how did China going from being the 77th country to get on the internet to being the second most powerful in the world in record time? What's that about?
Right. And in this episode, we use an example. We walk through a day and the digital life of a typical girl here in Beijing, which is my friend Cici.
It's a real person, and we fictionalize her story this much. It's a good story, but
again, listen to the
very
show.
typical. Listen to the show. So, week 5. Finance. We're talking about money, and the first episode up, episode 21, is the cultural value of money in China. Now, everyone has probably heard the stories. You know, China invented paper money. Great. That's all. It's important. Much respect, right? Is this the one? Oh.
This way.
Which way?
Anyway, I'll teach you offline.
Okay, teach you later. So we go through the paper money thing really fast, faster than that little failed comedy bit did. But we talk about the value of money and how that has really shaped society here, and many more interesting tidbits.
Yeah, as you know, that China is one of the first countries to use currency in this world.
Right.
And the history of using currency has lasted 5,000 years. In the process of this formation and development of this ancient Chinese currency, it had experienced 6 evolutions in history.
Right, and we track this, in as much detail as we need to, kind of high level, but we want to give you the flavor of this. And one thing, my big takeaway, Chinese people are really working. They're really willing to work hard to sustain a great quality of life here. And there's a phrase that Lucy translates as "sustain the bitterness of life." We talk about what that means. It's pretty profound stuff.
Yeah, it's more like a 省吃俭用. It used to be such a cultural principle on my parents' generation.
Okay.
Even for now, I think. Also, you know that China has long been a saving society, but not long ago it moved to a more of the crazy spending mode.
Right.
Actually, we have a business term called upgrade consumerism, right? The 消费升级. But it probably shifted back eventually.
Probably. China is huge, so take all this with a few grains of salt, a little bit of cynicism, a little skepticism.
Yeah.
But it probably will swing back.
Yeah.
Next up is a really interesting one, episode 22, Filial Piety, Wealth and Happiness. Now, filial piety, this concept of being faithful and loyal to your parents, that's not unique to China by any means. But the meaning of this in China, 孝
孝顺,
third tone? 孝, fourth tone.
孝.
Right. That's my fourth tone, of course. That concept of filial piety or 孝 here goes a lot deeper and has much greater implications than it typically does in the modern Western culture.
Right. Truly, you have to understand this concept of 孝 or 孝顺. To parents, their children are both an investment in the future and insurance for the future.
Yes. The way I put it, children are basically personalized financial products at a super crass level, but that's pretty appropriate.
We say it in a cold way, but in reality, it worked for sustaining this whole thing, economy, whole agricultural and sustainable business. Right.
That's why people are still here to be having these conversations, because there is a lot of thought paid to this. Next up is the cashless society. What do Alipay, Apple Pay, WeChat Pay, and other cashless apps have in common? Well, they make payments super easy and convenient, but sometimes that can be too convenient.
Yeah. We get deep into some of these possible problems that a cashless society might present.
Yeah.
Data privacy, like hacking data thing,
right.
overspending, and making the older generation, like my parents and my grandparents' generation, feel left behind.
Absolutely.
Which is a real problem here right now.
It is. And if Zuckerberg sells your data, we can't help you, but we can help you to not go out of control with your spending if you listen to this. Overconsumption is the next episode. We talk about that. Some of the shows are funnier than others, and we keep it pretty light. It's like this. When it's just audio, we cut out a little more of this. You see us just kind of having fun and kind of going through this. But, this show is pretty serious. Episode 24. This really talks about this epidemic of overconsumption, right? So there's a serious dark side here of easy credit, fast money, and there's a whole generation of people here. Those of us from the West have a lot of history of dealing with this. Some of us, if you're my age, you might have been broke and made money 3 times by now as an adult. It's a new thing here, and people are just trying to get their heads around how to deal with it.
Well, can you believe that? There used to be stories in the headline in the news that saying, hey, American indulge in overconsumption.
They noticed.
Chinese move up by enduring hardship, end quote.
Right. Absolutely. We used to really pay a lot of attention to that.
That's 2011, actually, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely. That that's an actual headline from 2011, and then there's one that actually is from more recent times.
Yep.
Things are changing very fascinating. This more recent headline: credit card debt 88.1 billion yuan, but that's a lot of 88.1 billion overdue. Overconsumption is destroying the lives of young people. End quote. And when was that one from?
That's 2018.
Yeah.
I think it's like 2 months ago.
Yeah.
Yes, this is a more common type of new headline here from this past, this fall.
Absolutely.
But it's absolutely crazy for us to reflect on this. as a Chinese society.
Yeah, and you see it kind of blowing up everywhere. They're really grappling with things. Next up, episode 25, Investing in China. This was our Friday show that week, and we had a little bit of a preview of our Season 2 format. We had a special guest. We had Elliot Zagman from the China Tech Investor Podcast, and he's also a writer. He helps us to kind of broadly frame these structural differences between the East and the West in terms of the way the financial structures work here.
Yeah, it was really fun to have a special guest to give us his thoughts on this particular topic. Much deeper version of that coming in 2019.
Absolutely. Now, I'm just going to quote him here. This is very high level, but he said, the best way to look at investing in China is to look at it as being somewhere in the middle between two spectrums, right? One is between a developed economy and then a developing economy, and the other metric to look at is between a state economy and a market economy. So those two things, and there's more to it, but realize there are kind of two tracks that are happening and they're not always parallel. So that can be really tricky to navigate.
I mean, it could be a good introduction here, and especially if you're new to it.
Yeah.
And it provides this clarity if you're experienced.
Right, which I'm not. So it's very helpful. Elliot's preaching to me on that episode, but it's very useful information.
Check that out.
Absolutely. Week 6, making friends. We start off with guanxi and how to develop it. How do we tackle this one? Guanxi. People have heard about guanxi before.
Well, we start with hopefully a fresh take on guanxi, the most traditional and sometimes over-discussed style of Chinese network and relationship building. The rest of this week, we'll look at the Chinese social media and tips for creating lasting bonds and much, much more.
Absolutely. Guanxi is really related to Confucius, the agricultural society. There are market factors. It's related to scarcity. It goes really deep here. We talk about it actually even more as we go. Yeah. Social media is episode 27. Today, on this episode, we talked about Ying's 101 challenges on her very own journey to the West, and that gives us a framework to look at how the rise of social media in China and its kind of ever-expanding and more central role in people's daily lives has influenced society.
Right, this literally is one of my favorite episodes. Yeah. I truly have a lot to say. Social media and its role in today's world is shaping our perception about everything here, almost like a relationship between people and the world. And we really need to understand how we are shaped by the whole social media algorithm, right? And we have to use that to boost our cultural intelligence, to improve the 3 most important thinking that I always mention in our podcast: critical thinking, independent thinking, and deep thinking.
Absolutely. The key takeaway for me was do not underestimate the power of these cross-cultural connections you can make thanks to social media. So this is one kind of cross-cultural, but even if you're, if you're just say in the US and you're in a big city and you have friends back home in a small town or vice versa, right? That is a cross-cultural connection because you're really living in 2 different universes. So all of this stuff, how we pay attention to it and the power we give it helps to shape our decision-making abilities, and having that information though enhances our value. The more you're aware of it, the more value you can have.
We talk here.
Absolutely. Next up is IRL, old school internet speak for in real life. And this is the oldest way to make friends. That's how we've been doing it from time immemorial. Yeah. We cover things ranging from food trucks to luchuar. Luchuar. I know how to eat it. We talk about a guy named Roz Galore and Mike Rowe. We talk about the importance of developing empathy to make friends across cultures.
And we have fun talking about what a typical weekend is like for Westerners and for Chinese folks.
Absolutely. There's a lot of big group fun with dancing here in China.
Right there.
Yeah, a little square right around the corner.
It's called 广场舞.
Right, and that's kind of like the Chinese line dancing, square dancing thing with it's people of all ages.
My mom still loves it.
You think of the old ladies out there kind of getting their groove on, and they're listening to, what do I say? It's like bad Chinese EDM, which is to say EDM.
It's good exercise.
It's good exercise. Also, luchuar. Luchuar.
So you have the.
I gotta learn how to say it right
because I love. In the fourth tone.
That I do have difficulty in the 4th tone. So barbecue here is a very great social tool that reflects the culture, and this is true wherever barbecue exists. Here, it's called luchuar.
Yep.
And we call it barbecue skewers, but I call it delicious.
Good.
The next episode of episode 29 is brotherhood and sisterhood. And these bonds of brotherhood and sisterhood are often created more among close friends in China here. We talk about the origins of that in literature and how that relates to my Western fraternal roots. I'm in a fraternity in China, not in China, and much more.
We learned one of the most well-known stories in Chinese history that deals with this topic of brotherhood, which is 桃园三结义. Go check that out. We talk about 闺蜜 and 男闺蜜, and how to know if you are actually have this 闺蜜 thing with someone.
And how would you know that? Are there...
Is you have slept with her. Together. I mean, you can chat all about all the little secrets all night.
Note to Western friends, it's not what you think it is. It's not what my silly reaction.
All right.
It's like sleepaway, only as older.
Okay.
It's like sleepaway camp. Moving on. Okay. Episode 30. Who pays? Okay. Who does pay?
Yeah, it's very important. The expectation about who pays the bill on the night, varies from culture to culture.
Right.
And China sure has our own set of rules in this matter.
Absolutely. When you're eating out at a restaurant, it's not uncommon, and I've seen this situation a lot, is you'll see the check will come to a table, and there's a group of people, they're all rushing to pay the bill. People will sometimes almost literally fight over who gets to pay the bill. And so like the waiter or the cashier has to like sort of let the guests sort it out. But what are they saying when they're like, I want to give you a bill?
I would say I heard my Westerner friends love it. Love it here in China because they like to hear say, "Oh, 我请客, it's my treat." There are a handful of many Chinese reasons for this fighting for the bill behavior that we talk about. One of the biggest is the very real fear of owing someone or something. This go back to the whole historical thing.
Absolutely.
The phrase to know here is 欠人情. We don't want 欠人情. We don't want owe somebody a favor. Because that's so much like a cultural code in our daily life.
Absolutely. And we talk about this earlier, talking about the roots of the agrarian society, because it really meant something to owe somebody a favor, and this is like kind of a leftover thing from that. What's not left over is week 7, all about Chinese millennials. We got one right here. I like how she like swells up. I don't see middle-aged Lao Wai. That's not not on this list. Okay,
this is my week.
Got it. It is your week. It's always your week, I think. So we talk about gratitude on episode 31. I have 5 shows about this, and we talk about the huge role that they're playing in their country and in the world. And in this episode, we talk about that we compare them from China to the U.S. counterparts. And I have a lot of pop cultural references because I can't help myself. But it's a pretty fun episode.
Right. And we also mentioned about key opinion leader, KOL, right? It plays a very big role in not only helping the consumers, the millennial consumers, to create a ready-made style that works. It can also help them to become fashionable in their own right?
Absolutely. The bottom line from all this is that Chinese millennials are changing the country more dynamically than any other generation so far, and they're going to be the core of the society here in 5 years. That's when they will be the statistical majority in all the positions of leadership, and the fate of your country is heavily dependent on you, so no pressure. No pressure.
Challenge it, accept.
Sweet. Well, we got to have a little fun with all this pressure, so now we're going to talk about entertainment and those KOLs. So KOLs are the key opinion leaders, like she mentioned. That's the Chinese version of the offline influencers, live streamers, YouTubers. How they get paid here and the impact they have, it might surprise you, right? Their rise has been pretty interesting. We also talk about Western youth habits and things like that to give it some context.
Yeah, and this is a huge thing. And KOL does not only lead the way in fashion or in e-commerce, but they also, there's a new wave of young consumers are actually willing to pay for the content they really like, which kind of are endorsed by the KOLs a lot.
Absolutely.
And paying is so easy, and pirating is so hard. So the whole dynamic here is changing. That we are like click to pay is like e-commerce for us, so easy.
And I'm very happy to hear that as somebody who has earned his living in entertainment, because we talk about entertainment in the West a bit, and I do think we have more that unites us than divides us, but the tastes are very different. And American young people supposedly more interested in different things than young Chinese.
Yeah. Overall, I think Westerners are more willing to participate in open, adventurous activities and like skydiving, things like that. I tried once.
Yeah.
And are more willing to travel and accept new things. But in China, we're millennials. We're trying to be like that as well.
Very nice. Next up is episode 33, which is about knowledge anxiety. Now, technology has helped many Chinese millennials to, of course, redefine many old concepts to suit their psyches today. But one of these things is the thirst for knowledge, and that usually is a good thing, right? But in the hands and brains of people who are overstressed and overcommitted, that's not always a good thing.
We truly have to understand the knowledge anxiety here among Chinese millennials, which actually in Chinese we call it 知识焦虑. So the key idea here is China really is an online nation right now.
Right, absolutely. And when you have more than 500 million internet users who have mobile payment capabilities, you're going to develop a pretty massive market to separate those people from their digital money.
Yeah, it's very easy. And the content, the business, what we call 知识付费, whether for learning or entertainment, it's particularly has been growing to feed this particular yin and yang hungers, right? Namely, gaining knowledge and releasing the stress.
Absolutely, and there are a lot of different types of content people like to buy online, specifically.
Of course. And the leading online business and the leading content business stars here in China, for example, 得到 app, right? Probably all Chinese people know, I think. And knowledge. They provide this kind of knowledge service, which is quite popular here in China.
Right.
The user typically can click and buy, and with this premier knowledge package and this content through subscription, paid audio, and all kinds of ebooks. And most recently, they have launched this 得到 University, 得到大学, which is kind of offline engagement. Pay attention to this phenomenon, because here, content business has been, from my perspectives, from online to offline right now, they're forming all kinds of communities. And the big, content business stars actually developing new models of creating this kind of online business in an extensive way.
Absolutely, and there are Western analogies to this, like Udemy, which is kind of not just Western, but it's everywhere. A lot of us in the West use it. Himalaya FM is one of the platforms that has paid audio content and learning content, both entertainment and learning.
It's so simple, just
and
on the phone.
Absolutely, and the mobile payment tech that's right there, like in her hand, right? That tech that makes the platforms thrive, it's addictive. The actual payment tech is like a game, and you get all the lovely signals. Just like with the likes and the loves and the shares on your social media and the comments, when you're doing the WeChat wallet or the Alipay, and it's like, ooh, that's so satisfying. And that can lead to even more anxiety, which leads us to our next episode. This one really kind of blew my mind. This episode 34 about nomadic youth and bereavement culture, which is, of course, called Sang in Chinese. And this is something that's very relevant to some Chinese millennials. Now, the former people, the nomadic youth, are kind of like these strivers, and they're sort of untethered from traditional norms, and they're charging out there, they're living, inventing these new lives very kind of energetically. But the Sang people are more in this lethargic existential crisis. I'll say that again. This is pretty heavy stuff, but we do have some fun at least talking about it.
Yeah, to define this term, Sang, this is what led to the idea of mourning become an accepted way to relieve young people's feeling of helplessness, right? And they say that online to basically each other. Quote, admit that I'm a waste. How can you tell me about my life? Like 我已经承认我是个废物了，你怎么还对我的生活指手画脚? So they prefer to do this kind of 葛优躺, which is like basically laying down.
Laying on the couch. And what was the TV show? There was the guy, Uncle, what's his face? Or something. There was the guy that was like, he was always laying on the couch. Like,
that is such
a funny... It's
such
so
a funny
funny
emoji right now we send to each other, basically showcase how was your weekend? Sang, which basically like we lying
Like,
Down,
didn't
doing
move, didn't move. There's a couch over there. She's gesturing. Didn't move, just laid on the couch the whole weekend. And in the West, you used to know the depressed kids because they're all wearing the black and they're listening to The Cure or Echo and the Bunnymen. And I like those bands too. I didn't wear that much black. But it's important to understand, if you understand the culture's phenomenons, you're going to understand the preferences of the young people, of course, and also get a better sense about how to relate to them. On a more optimistic note, you have the type of Chinese youth going global as episode 35.
Right.
We end that last week talking about the Chinese who are studying abroad. We talk about the original sea turtle, Ronghong. We discuss several organizations and cross-cultural adventures. And we talk about a particular cross-cultural adventure student we know, you. But you were inspired by this original man as well, right?
Yes, yes. His name's Ronghong, as we mentioned in our podcast. And he was the first guy, actually began his journey about 150 years back. Really opened the doors for Chinese people, Chinese young people going global for overseas studies. And he went to Yale University. His education taught him to take responsibility and dare to think about big things, bigger than himself, and to make change happen, right? I think I really admire him.
Well, and his dream that he had made it possible for just countless Chinese students after him to actually go off to college. What was really interesting is that he went off and then he came back, right? So he had these real personality and life transforming benefits that he brought back and brought to his society. And of course, though, it's not always easy. So when you go abroad, you often have these strong cultural conflicts. And I know that you can relate to this.
You will face a loneliness while away from parents and dear friends, and possibly discrimination from the people in your host country. But the pros always outweigh the cons.
Right. And I mean, living abroad, I've been here in China. I've been co-located on and off for 5 years, but I've been here full time, basically close to 3 years now. Living abroad trains you in a way that nothing else really can.
Yeah, here's something that I always think of. Literally, a bilingual or multilingual environment makes people's brain much more active.
Right.
And also, if you have this empathy, right? Your heart opens wider and your vision of the world can become greater. It's really different. And really different. So the world you see is often different from the one the other people see.
Absolutely. And so if you can see and experience these different lives, the idea, of course, is that's going to help you develop some real empathy.
Right. And for me, for instance, that pushes me to really want to make the change happen. Instead of staying comfortably and only living for myself, I honestly want to change the world for better, especially in today's world, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I do.
And there was a profound thing to realize, but it's real.
Yeah. And sincerely, that was a really nice way to end that week in that episode. That was just last week as we're sitting here recording this. And so I highly recommend it just for what I learned from YINGYING. And we really hope that you check that out. And this week we are ending week 8. And that's all about official meetings as well as this wrap up. We started off with a big discussion on face. And we specifically talk in this episode and the next few about navigating the high stakes official kinds of meetings in China, right? Those that have government officials or government agencies. We give some deep background on mianzi or face, and we share a lot of ideas and experiences. And I share a lot because I've been fortunate in my business to be in these rooms where I'm the only Laowai, and I've been in rooms where there almost have never been any foreigners.
Yeah.
And so I really try to put that into the show.
In this particular episode of this week, I can relate a lot because it's a lot really about my story.
Yeah.
And the story in my life, and big part of my learning to relate to the other people.
Yeah.
Means I have to let go of certain cultural, tradition that when I'm, outside of China.
Absolutely.
When I'm in the U.S., when I'm in Brazil, and in a very exotic, very different culture, and I try as much as possible to fit in and to learn. But when I come back as, Chinese, traditional Chinese culture, when I'm with my family and friends, I try my best really to relate to them in a way that make them most comfortable, which means sometimes I really pay attention to, saving the face and, giving face, and which actually is a way of to show respect.
Well, that's very smart. And there's this concept of being China flexible that us foreigners kind of learn, which is sort of self-explanatory. But I learned that being China flexible also applies to Chinese people when they're out in the world. So I really appreciated hearing your stories on that. We talked about, in episode 37, meeting in a government office. And this was kind of fun. What do the sun, moon, and stars have to do with meetings in the government office in China? And how can our past episodes, we name check a few specifically, episode 6 of high context and low context communication, episode 7 about modesty, humility, and hierarchy, number 8, negotiation from week 2. How can all these things help you? We talk about that a lot on episode 37 just this week.
And actually, being invited to a government office for a formal meeting is maybe the most high-stake situation you'll find here in China as a foreigner, as you know.
Absolutely, yeah. So there's a lot we try to share as much as we can. Have to keep some confidentiality here. Episode 38, hosting in your office, and this is another special one. So entertaining the government-related leaders or business people in your office has these special protocols, and the power cleaning is just kind of the start of it, right? So we also talking about face. We talk about how the face worn by leaders and people has more in common with like the mask worn by a shaman. Also, YINGYING manages to tell a pretty funny joke that makes a great point, and there's a lot more to this too.
Yeah, go check that joke out, actually.
It's kind of an epic joke.
Yeah, in here, someone's face is essentially a mask. We think of those who have great face, right, in society, very popular.
Right.
They're very popular. We think of them as having the so-called magical power, or 神通广大, or 呼风唤雨 sometimes. Because the face, think about this, going to all the ancient times, the face is literally a mask, a tool for talking to God.
And, I said this in my comments about the episode. Anytime where I can sort of relate my interest in Western esotericism and spiritual traditions with China is like Christmas on my birthday. And we just had Christmas, and my birthday's in a week. So I'm not begging for a gift. I've already got the gift of how China works. Speaking of that, keeping the flow going, episode 39, that's the one that people will be listening to on Thursday. We're recording on Thursday, a little inside secret. Today's episode that goes up is all about flow. We talk about flow in several ways. We talk about conversational flow, performance flow, and the endless flow of words that we put into your ears so far this year.
Yeah, we also discussed this very important concept of somebody's 单位 or work unit, right? And how that idea has shaped the culture here in countless ways since, being introduced.
Absolutely. And this gives us what we think is a fresh take on the individual versus collective conversation. And we talk about the role that Western superhero movies have played in refining people's conceptions of heroism and what's possible.
There's a lot of content in it, so be sure to check that out.
Absolutely. All right, we made it to the end of season 1. It was quite a journey. We're really happy that you were along for the ride with us. We are going to take a little break ourselves. We're pretty much ready to do that. And we will see you again during the first full week in January. We don't know the exact date that we want to start releasing the new shows, but somewhere that week of January 7th, we'll be back with episode 1 of season 2.
Until then, we hope you've had a great holiday with your family and friends, and that you'll have a nice spring festival ahead of you.
Absolutely. Don't forget to rate, review, share, or subscribe to us wherever you find the show.
We're available almost everywhere now, so that's pretty easy to do, hopefully.
Absolutely. You can also give us feedback, contact us, or check out what else we're up to by visiting our website. What is that website?
That's How China Works podcast.com.
Absolutely. Thank you again for listening and for watching today. I'm Brendan Davis.
And I'm Yingying Li. See you next year on How China Works.